Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I am Jennifer Wells with Community Change Action and the Black Freedom Collective. Today, we are being joined by a group of dynamic Black voters and organizers from across the country who are building power in their communities and connecting with voters for the upcoming election and for their vision for the future. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to invite everyone joining us to post your questions, your stories, or ideas in the chat. We want to urge you to register to vote. Please check your registration at the link on the screen and in the chat provided. Election season has already begun and registration closes soon. Voting is powerful and it is necessary. By making a voting plan now, you can ensure your voice is heard. Let's help each other show up, whether it's through mail-in voting or safely in person at the polls. Make sure our votes are counted. Today, we are going to be focusing on Black voters and the big push to the polls. How are we shaping our collective story around power, and how do we create change for our families? I understand my power for November 3rd, and I am fully focused on not relinquishing that power post-election. My biggest fear is that my people, my Black community, doesn't always feel like they can ask for what they really need and, more importantly, what they deserve. And how do we, as a community and a collective, hold those elected accountable? So now let me introduce our guests. I'm so excited. We have Tomicka Robinson. Tomicka is currently the digital director for NextGen Michigan. Her role includes the management of all digital content for the state regarding their Facebook page, email blast, text messages, and graphic designs. Their advocacy platform is centered around getting out the youth vote for progressive candidates and policies. She's a former Community Change Communications Fellow, canvasser, and social media manager for Stephanie Chang for Senate 2018, and also a community engagement manager for Detroit Future City. Tomicka is herself a member of Black Women's Roundtable and 482 Forward. She prides herself on being unapologetically Black, magical, and radical. I love it, Tomicka. Tomicka is the proud mother of two beautiful Black children. Welcome, Tomicka. Next, I want to welcome Takaya Smith. Takeiya is a racial justice youth organizer working to unite young people across the state who share common values with the Young West Virginia Power Building Movement. Takeiya was the co-chair of the Call to Action for Racial Equality Initiative, a collaborative community effort that brought about an 8-point anti-racism plan with the Charleston Police Department. Takeiya is a leader with the Black Lives Matter West Virginia, an effort that began with addressing institutional racism on college campuses. Takeiya is now the lead organizer for the Young West Virginia Power Building Movement. Young WV is now supporting young Black voters to engage our elected officials with accountability through education and action. Young West Virginia is empowering students who are challenging bigotry in their schools and at the county level, with young people from 14 to 18 years old. The Young West Virginia Power Building Movement is committed to developing young leaders to become active participants in the systems impacting their daily lives. Welcome, Takeiya. And finally, we have Frederick Hunter from Mississippi. Frederick Hunter is an assistant professor of sociology and social work at Tougaloo College. Additionally, he serves in an administrative role as the director of the Quality Enhancement Plan and Faculty Development. Tougaloo College is an HBCU that served as a refuge for activists during the Civil Rights Movement and became a central gathering place for Mississippi organizers. Today, the institution and its faculty still push forward in its activism for equality and social justice. Mr. Hunter is currently a doctoral candidate in the Urban and Regional Planning program at Jackson State University. His dissertation is titled Local and Sustainable Foods, a case study of planning and development districts' food planning in the Mississippi Delta. His research spans several areas, but converges at the intersections of social and environmental justice for the marginalized and disenfranchised community. A warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us and finding new ways to build the power of Black people and families in this community. Thank you, guys. So let's get started today. November 3rd is 32 days away, and we've had quite a week already. The election season has already begun, And as our nation continues to struggle with the health consequences of COVID-19 and the pandemic, over 200,000 deaths attributed, plus an economic recession, depression looming, we are in solidarity to understand how the Black community will be impacted in disproportionate numbers and ways. After justice failed us yet again in the Breonna Taylor case, we must continue to show up and demand the grand jury tapes be released. We must continue to show solidarity with our sister, Breonna. There is great pressure and narrative that focuses on the Black voter and Black voter turnout for this season. This season is going to make or break us, as they say. We must be also unapologetic, as they are with us in demanding our turnout. As Black people, we must turn out and show up. We know this. Let's aim to match this energy as a community to follow up on our demands after the election season. And so I turn to my panelists, our honored guest. As we said, demands are being made of us unapologetically for November 3rd. Are our communities able and willing to match this energy as we approach November 3rd? And most importantly, are we ready to match this energy and then some post-election, transitioning into 2021 and our future? I'd like to turn that first over to Tomicka to hear how it's going on the ground in Michigan.
Well, I'll say first and foremost that I think now more than ever, Black voters, especially in Michigan, are empowered and extremely motivated to participate in this upcoming election in a multitude of groups and coalitions and communities, because they are just basically ready for change, and they're ready for stable change. And I think that they see that in the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris ticket. I think especially with a VP who is a proud woman of color, I think that has definitely ignited a lot of us because we can see ourselves in her. And we want to be a part of the history that we are really, really hoping that would be made come Tuesday, November 3rd. So we can celebrate in that moment, just like we did when Obama first became president. We just want to be a part of that, and we're ready to make sure that it happens. So that's what the energy is feeling like in Michigan, especially in the communities that NextGen Michigan works with on a daily basis.
Excellent. Thank you, Tomicka. I'm going to turn to Frederick. What are your thoughts about energy in the communities on the ground in Mississippi as we're pushing towards in these last 32 days and as we're thinking forward past November 3rd and when this election is finally qualified?
Okay. Well, I want to first thank you for allowing me to be on this panel discussion with these other colleagues. One of the things I would say is that people are energized, and you see that with regard to getting out to the polls, but also with regard to recognizing how voter suppression has been a system in which has facilitated the inability of individuals to actually get to the polls. So recognizing those, even at the local level, people are engaged and realize what's at stake here, because it moves beyond just putting someone into office today, but thinking about it generationally and how this particular vote is going to impact us years from now.
Exactly. I hear you. Takeiya, what are your thoughts about what's going on in the ground here in West Virginia? How are Black voters feeling?
So young West Virginia student leaders are taking on voter engagement at their campuses as we speak. Their strategy for voter turnout amongst their peers is very multi-layered and outside of colonial norms. They've been courageous enough to take on the task of getting young people to believe that our systems can actually work for us if they civically participate. They do this even if recent history says otherwise, because of their long-term commitment to holding themselves and elected officials accountable.
So I'm hearing from everyone that the energy is matched. So our voting communities, our Black communities are ready to turn out. They understand the pressure that is on us for November 3rd. I think maybe the second follow-up question that I'm interested in hearing from folks is again, going back into the future, right? Our world doesn't change on November 3rd or November 16th or January 21st, right? We know there's going to have to be a lot of effort and a lot of work put in. And sincerely, we're kind of worn down from this electoral cycle, right? It's been a rough year. 2020 has not been kind. And so I want to ask, as you're talking about the energy that's already there to turn out the polls in person, by mail, we understand our options. What is it going to take for your specific communities to be as energized and as unapologetic for the demands that we're going to have to? Let's say the election, it turns out exactly how we want it to be, right? That is our dream. That is our vision. That's what we're planning on, right? We still are fully aware that we're going to have to still hold even a Biden-Harris ticket accountable to Black demands. I felt this in particular at the debate this past Tuesday, which was in itself an event. But I was waiting, and I didn't necessarily appreciate how Black folks were brought into the conversation as a topic for the debate. And that only reinforced with me how much more conversation our community is going to have to be in once we get the results we want. And so my next follow-up question to you is just that, from the communities that you're working in, what is needed for our communities to remain energized and to remain unapologetic as we hold even a Biden-Harris ticket or administration accountable? And I'll send that to Frederick. Let's start with you.
Okay, so I was actually thinking about it. I think it's going to entail us realizing that even in our day-to-day interactions, that it's important that we continue to, even at the local level, hold our elected officials accountable, and in turn think about how those policies and procedures that are occurring at that local level impact federal legislation. It's not that we shouldn't focus on the Biden-Harris ticket, but many of those policies and procedures that are occurring at those local levels have implications at the federal level. So when we're thinking about advocating, so my dissertation focuses on food planning. So in thinking about food planning within these neighborhoods that for individuals that experience food deserts, well, there's federal dollars out there in which we can attract. So that entails me not only talking to my local official and him or her advocating on our behalf at that federal level. And that in turn feeds into this idea that, hey, Biden, Harris, or Trump, Pence, whoever it is, you are still obligated to these individual communities that are essentially sometimes voiceless.
I hear you. What are your thoughts, Takeiya?
Well, I think to start, stop the bullying, that happens at election time that happens with Black people. It's like, it's so pushy. It's like, even if you haven't been anywhere near the Black community, once election season comes upon us, it's on you. It's on you. It's on you all. It's on you all. It's on our community. And it's like, where have you been this whole time? And if we have so much potential power, the Black community, what is your plan for the Black community? So I think that really needs to be addressed. No one should be pressing the Black community for votes without a plan to address the needs of the Black community. And expressing your values is not enough of a plan. So I think it's about educating and young people and empowering them to carry their vote with that knowledge.
So carrying their vote with the knowledge that they'll have to demand action and they'll have to demand a plan. I hear that. Tomicka, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would definitely second Takeiya. I think that a lot of the commitment to following through on this election, every election starts with voter education. And NextGen Michigan and NextGen America as a whole is definitely dedicated to that awareness. So I believe that in order for Black voters in particular to continue to vote, like I said, in this election, every election is going to have to start with understanding what the local offices, as far as their titles and their roles, how that translates to the community. So what does the county commissioner do? What does your local clerk do? What do precinct delegates do? And understanding that, yes, we are committed to the progressive movement and making sure that we're progressively turning that needle every chance and every moment that we can, and celebrating the little wins together as a unit, and making sure that we're always amplifying that work behind it. But I think that there's something to be said to make sure that young voters understand where their place is, and then also let them be encouraged in the fact that they can run for office themselves. Like, they can be the change that they want to see. And quite frankly, voting is your most powerful form of protest, and really highlighting that and really making sure that messaging is brought up in like every community event, every town hall event, every virtual event while we're existing in this pandemic currently. But I also think that we have to ensure that elected officials also are a part of that voter education, and that there's an open communication line when it comes to understanding what our needs are and making sure that's translated in policy making. So there's like a feedback loop whenever there is possible, because I think sometimes that's lost. But that's why I'm particularly excited about a Biden-Harris ticket, because I feel like that effort has been really put behind making sure that feedback loop exists, and that it is stable and that it's functional and it's permanent.
Thank you, Tomicka. You actually lead into the next question that I had for the group, and it's going to be like a little bit separated, because I'm here in West Virginia, so I know Takeiya's struggle to some degree, and the struggle with West Virginia, and to some parts Frederick, Mississippi. It's the fact that we have a lot of energy around the November 3rd election, right? And we have we have the push, right? We have the strategies on the ground. But we are also fully aware as a state that we don't have the value on the national federal level, even though that's the premier top tier campaign and conversation for the moment. That in essence, our electoral votes are not as weighted as, let's say, a swing state as Michigan or Ohio or Wisconsin, that are constantly coming up in conversation, and in conversation in particular when we're talking about moving Black voters. So specifically to both Takeiya and to Frederick, how and it's going back to that energy, right? It's trying to keep that momentum flowing through ebbs and flows. We know that always happens, but how are you specifically talking to young voters or even older voters around the importance, even when it may be a thought in their head that come November 3rd, we won't necessarily be on the front table for deciding the presidential, vice presidential administration, but we're definitely in the mix. So I know that was a lot of words. So that I'm wanting to know, how are we feeling in a Mississippi and a West Virginia with momentum? And either one can toss it up. I'll pick you, Frederick.
So just like Tomicka said earlier, I think it's important that this idea of civic education and what that means and what that entails, not even beyond just this election, educating young voters about that entails thinking about, even if you don't win, or even if your candidate doesn't win, what does that mean for you being an activist within your community and beyond, and thinking about those marginalized individuals. In addition, it also takes into account engaging them in conversations about voter apathy. We understand we may not win, but that doesn't mean that this race is over and that we throw in the towel. And we see this illustrated through campaigns like Stacey Abrams. This idea that even though I didn't get this particular position, it doesn't mean that I end here. I still get out there and I hit the ground running and become an activist for my community.
Yes. Takeiya?
Yeah, so all of the organizing through Young West Virginia is centered around dismantling anti-Black racism. Working with young people in rural West Virginia comes with its unique challenges and assets. Ironically, West Virginia is often ignored not always, but often ignored on the national scale when it comes to racial justice, even though it's one of the most difficult places for Black people to exist in this entire country. I'll also say, you know, when engaging, especially young people, especially young Black people, about elections and voting, you can see them like physically disengage when you start talking about the presidential election here. So I think my answer to your question, Jennifer, is local, local, local. Speak local and how elections shape our everyday lives here, and exactly what that looks like. That's what I found to be really successful in our voter engagement with young Black people here and young people here in general in West Virginia. And, you know, Young West Virginia is nonpartisan. We trust young people to make the best decision that aligns with their values. And we understand with the long history of West Virginia that people are going to go, you know, young people are going through their journey, and we trust and show up for them through that.
So I have a little bit of a side question that I want to throw out to the group. And I know that Takaya, and I know you as well, Tomicka, are working directly with young people. And Frederick, on a college campus, you can't help but be involved. A question that I have around intergenerational conversations and the value in both perspectives, right? The young energy, the young person on the ground, the activists, the folks that are showing up day to day for the movement for Black lives, and who we organize with on the ground with community change, as well as how do we really, really bridge and build solidarity in an intergenerational way as we look in towards November 3rd, because of course that's completely in our front path and vision, but in particular how we build together after the election. Tomicka, what are your thoughts?
I just want to definitely highlight what Frederick said earlier about making sure that even though we may not win this election or the next election, there are still ways to shape change. I really think that this is a powerful statement. And yes, we need to have voter sympathy, but I think there's something to also be said about trying to be obviously realistic, but placing a positive spin on it. I think that voters are used to negativity, are used to disappointment. And if we have the ability to basically, you know, take heed to that messaging, that there's still so many ways to shape change, I think that can be powerful within itself. And that could definitely keep the momentum going along with the voter education. But I feel like with voter education, I think that's something that really needs to be intentional when you're planning out what your strategy may be or how you're going to meet people where they are, and make sure that intergenerational element is applied to that. So you're not missing anyone in the conversation. Like everyone feels like they have a seat at the table and that they have a voice. And I just feel like more work needs to be applied towards that. And I will also say there is a wonderful feeling that you get when you're speaking to an organizer or activist or an advocate that looks like you, that may be from your generational background, if you will. A lot of our field organizers and our fellows at NextGen are actually young voters themselves. Some of them are even first-time voters. So they add that caveat to other young voters, especially Black voters, that may not feel like they've always been included. But as of late, because 2020 has been a very questionable year, they have been empowered, and they've been reacting to calls of action because they feel directly impacted by what has transpired. And I think all of that plays into like the proper planning of what voter education looks like.
Hey, Takaya, what do you feel about the intergenerational conversations or bridging that for better solidarity, deeper solidarity? Oh, you're on mute.
I was on mute. Yeah, I think that there's so much value on both sides. You know, I think young people need the wisdom, and our elders, need the new insight and the innovation. And I don't think that trying to work without the other, well, we know it doesn't work on both ends. We're new, young people are very new to political and civic engagement, and we could save ourselves a lot of headache if we just listen. And I think that's true for the other side too.
I hear you. I hear you. Frederick, do you want to add anything?
I was just going to say that more now than ever, we're starting to see, I think that the older generation has always been actively engaged in attempting to educate, especially the young generation, about ways to be activists within their communities. I think through recent issues with social justice and rioting, we see more of a presence of how that's occurring, especially with the John Lewises, who actively promoted bringing younger generations into the conversation. Let me educate you and teach you about the ways in which to mobilize, but also how your issues, the issues you're dealing with today, are the same issues, just repackaged in a way that we dealt with during the civil rights movement. And these were some of the strategies and ways in which we attempted to navigate it, which may be useful to you, but also you have this ability to take social media and magnify that voice. So I think that now more than ever, we see how we're attempting to bridge that gap. Could it be better? Most definitely, especially when we think about those young voters who think that not going to vote will be just as impactful as going to the polls.
Yes, yes, yes. I want to turn a little bit back towards the unapologeticness of our community and the demand for what we deserve. And first, as an organizer now that's looking towards getting on the ground, hopefully very soon physically, but at least virtually for the moment, in the coastal southern region of the country. My biggest question to the folks that I'm talking to now is clarification and clarity around what is our vision, right? The Black Freedom Collective is about Black liberation, and we are about solidarity towards moving to that liberation. But I often want to hear from folks before I set the parameters or dictate even in any way what liberation looks like. I know what it feels like and it looks like for me. So I'm asking you all, we're going to take a little bit of time with this question. What is the bold vision for the Black community that you are working with right now? Give us a second. And then I'd love for Takeiya to kick us off on that one.
Do that. I'm doing a nice inhale and exhale on that. I think Young West Virginia's, I know Young West Virginia's bold long-term vision is for young people to become the gatekeepers to our communities with the support of everyone it impacts, with the support of our elders and our children, and for them to be able to shape communities that are more progressive and intentionally healing and restorative, and to take those values and apply them to our education, our criminal justice system, our healthcare, our childcare, and push things forward in ways that intentionally and specifically address the Black community, in ways that are as unapologetic as possible.
Thank you, Takaya. Tomicka.
I will say that a lot of our field organizers are very passionate, dedicated, hardworking, young, and committed to seeing a progressive world realized where equality for everyone across the board, especially marginalized communities, is a reality. And I think their preference would be that sooner than later, and it happens in their lifetime. But I think the fact that we have young folks who are just on fire for something better and a change, I think will prove to be monumental. Um, and I think that that's exactly what we need to bridge a lot of these gaps that we're seeing when it comes to, like we were talking about a lot, quite frankly, is voter education and, being aware of local elections and how policy affects their everyday life. And I'm really excited for this next generation coming up because I think they're going to be exactly what we need to lift off and just continue moving forward in a way, like I said, that's very, very beneficial for everyone and not a select few. I'm a big fan of TikTok. I know a lot of our field organizers would say I'm too old, but the interesting fact is that millennials design TikTok, so there's that. But just to see their activism, their creativity, the way that they can get the simplest of messages across in such an emotionally impactful way. Like I've been on TikTok and teared up from some of these videos because it's just so, it's intentional and it's powerful, and it's just something that I have never experienced in all of the time that I've been organizing. And I'm excited about it. I'm excited about it because I think that oppressive entities and movements, their days are numbered.
Whew. Tomicka, you just said a word, and you almost have me ready to sign up for TikTok. I think I might try it now. So I'm thanking you for that. Yes. Fredrick, tell us about Mississippi.
So I would essentially say that some of the same aspects that the other two panelists contributed. But in thinking about Mississippi, it causes me to think about Fannie Lou Hamer and her life and the legacy that she leaves. And it's more so the Black community is asking, especially the younger generation, they're asking for a seat at the table. And not just to have a seat, but a seat in which they can be equals and contribute to their own communities. And I think that is really what the ultimate goal is. It's not really to challenge the system, but for you to recognize my value and my contribution to the overall society and to the policies that are being created that impact our own communities.
I hear you, Frederick. And I have dug deeper and deeper as 2020 has gotten us, as 2020 has strung along. I have been running to my elders and to wisdom, and Fannie Lou has given me so much energy and so much joy as I think about my next moves, as well as how I'm going to organize. She's kept me grounded. So just her memory keeps me grounded. Thank you for bringing her into this space with us. I want to let folks know that there's still an opportunity for you to drop a question or a comment that we can pose to our panelists as we're nearing the end of our session, but as this conversation is just building. I want to thank you all so much for this engaging moment. And I want to follow up again with my thoughts, just for a moment about what I'm feeling in this moment, talking to you all. This week has been hard. Last week was hard, and then it just kind of rolled into this week. And I intentionally thought about the question around our momentum and our energy, because I'll be honest, I was getting a little worn down. But I'm seriously saying this, and I'm not just hyping you up because I get to moderate this beautiful group of people. I am coming away from this conversation feeling hopeful, hearing from different pockets, from Mississippi, from West Virginia, and from Michigan, how we really are digging into our vision and we're really digging into our dream. And I think part of where I came in feeling a little discouraged was we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and we're still having to separate ourselves and live more in a virtual world than the world we're typically used to living in, where we're door knocking, where we're getting in community, where we're doing voter registration drives in person and not in drive-through fashion. And I want to hear, because I know a little bit about what Takeiya is doing, but I'd love to hear from you, Tomicka and Frederick, and of course Takeiya, jump in with how you are seeing some innovation. We talked about this a little bit earlier, some innovation and some creativity in how Black communities are keeping the energy, right? So we're there, right? We're pushing towards November 3rd. We're excited about it. We're going to stand in our ground. We're going to stand in our voice and power after the election. But if you could toss out to those of us that are listening some of the creative and innovative ways in which you know that folks have been keeping this momentum running. And I'll just toss it up to anybody can grab that one.
I will say that NextGen is all about innovation and making sure that we're hosting events that make sense, that are inclusive, intentional, and obviously offer a nugget of education, but are fun. They're engaging. They will cause participants to walk away reminiscing and talking and sharing. And we actually recently, last night, as a matter of fact, held a virtual concert with a bunch of local artists here in Michigan who have a following, who are young, who are unapologetically Black, folks of color. And it was a wonderful event, but we were able to jam out together. I mean, like you stated, we're in a pandemic where most of us are living in a bubble, and most of us have had to get used to a new world, a new way of living. But it was we had a poetry reading. We had a whole entire band just jam out in their living room. We had a whole DJ who is unapologetically Black herself, and has a connection to Pan Africa. I mean, it was absolutely amazing to be a part and kind of get a distraction, get away from a moment, but there's still elements of voter education thrown into the mix. But we try to make sure that when we host the events, we're uplifting the communities that our field organizers work in. I will say, I have to shout out our field organizers, because when I tell you these individuals, these folks with an X, are dedicated to the groundbreaking work that they're doing in their communities up and through Michigan. And then we're operating 11 other states across the country. And we're targeting those 18 to 35-year-old voters, and just making sure that they feel like they have an organization, they have individuals in their community who look like them and can speak to the issues that they deal with on a daily basis, and try to connect those dots in a way that makes sense. So they recognize, oh, okay, well, I didn't realize that this millage correlated to this issue that I've been having, or I didn't realize city council was the reason why I can't get X, Y, and Z in my neighborhood. But they do it in a way that isn't boring, because I mean, sometimes people have short attention spans, and you got to get the information to them quick and colorfully. So I will say that innovation is definitely one of our strong suits, especially in a virtual world, because nobody wants to be stuck on their laptop bored to death. You have to throw in a little bit of pizzazz, a little bit of sparkle, if you will.
And we definitely shout out to the culture, just shout out to knowing as a Black community how to make it the best it can be. And I want to break in for a second, because we actually have a question from Teresa in Atlanta, Georgia. And Teresa wants to know, what else can we do to assure voters go to the polls? I think we're speaking a little bit into it with the innovation, but can you all, Takeiya or Fredrick, speak to some of the ways that you assure that your people get to the polls?
I think this entails being active within our communities and recognizing that not everybody has the resources and they may need assistance. Especially in my community in Jackson, Mississippi, one of the things is that many of the small organizations are starting to plan for driving individuals to the polls. So finding out which individuals need those types of resources and then getting them there. In addition to having a barbecue at the polls, not necessarily at the polling site, but to engage people to recognize this is important. If we can show up at 9 p.m. for the club, of course we can show up for this barbecue at the polls, right? So making it important and relevant, but also making it an experience and acknowledging what this experience means within the context of politics.
Absolutely. Takaya, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I just appreciate several things, lots of things that have been said already. I think Tomicka and Frederick, you all like have hit on it, especially with my work, is that like it needs to be, you all are, saying fun. And I think, we all love fun. I connect fun from on a deeper level to joy, which is necessary for healing. And so it may sound trivial, but we're not supposed to be constantly driven from fear. We can also be driven by joy. And I think that has to be a part of our strategy and our work. So yeah, yes to the joy, yes to the fun and creativity. I wrote down some ideas, and I will say, step one, register and just make sure there's a plan to follow up with those people who have registered. Because again, this is new. And some people say it's handholding. I believe it's support.
Complete agreement. This has been such an amazing conversation. And I want to add something for Teresa in Atlanta. One of our amazing community change partners and BFC and Black Freedom Collective, we call it the BFC for short, partner New Georgia Project, is doing some amazing work on the ground in Georgia. And you can check them out and join in on their efforts to reach out to voters in Georgia directly. But you can also come join us. Every Wednesday, Community Change Action has a weekly volunteer party where we go out and we touch voters. We text voters, we engage voters, and we take action, and we draw people into this world. We know it's a little bit more difficult this year because of the pandemic and the limitations that are put upon us, but there's a way to do it. Come join us every Wednesday. I think there's a link that's floating across the screen, and I definitely know there's a way for you to sign up in the chat where you can just drop your name and your email, and we'll get in touch with you. We need you. And I'm going to say this, I've been there for the past Wednesdays, and it's an amazing, energized space where people are taking action together. So thank you. I want to wrap up with just the fact that I want to thank this panel, this great, amazing panel that has given me hope. You've energized me to go back out there to talk to my family members, to talk to my community members, to talk to my neighbors, to engage and assure that folks have a voting plan come November 3rd, but also to continue that conversation in creative and innovative, joyful ways as we actually make the demands for our community. And so again, we're so excited to keep joining us for this series. If this is your first time being with us, welcome. We're glad you joined us. Please show your support in the chat for each of our panelists, which you've been doing greatly while we've been talking. And if you're energized to join us in this movement of Black power building, please share your story. We're going to drop the link of Black at the Polls for you to join us there. And today's conversation will be immediately available on the Community Change Action social media sites, YouTube and Facebook. So our friends that weren't able to join us live can still catch up, and we invite you to like and subscribe and share these with your networks. And you can also join us for other sessions. We're going to be right back here next Friday, October 9th at 2 p.m. And our topic is going to be Black men in the movement. How do we function in the white patriarchy? Thank you all so much. Have an amazing and beautiful and joyful weekend.